Awesome. Hello and welcome to today's Community Conversations call. Today is Monday, July 17th, 2023. I got to remind myself sometime what year it is that we're in, but we've got a great presentation lined up. My name is Charlotte Otero. I'm the Community Strategist at Maddie's Fund. I am co-hosting the call today with my colleague, Irene Chancellong, Senior Grant Specialist at Maddie's Fund. Irene, I'll kick it over to you to continue on with our question of the day. We've been having some great conversations so far.
Yes, thank you, Charlotte. So yeah, just if anyone wanted to share some of their favorite childhood books, we would love to hear them. Of course, bonus points if it includes animals. Heard some great titles today. The Yearling. Thank you for that. Anybody want to unmute and share before we head into our national updates? Watership Down. Okay, Kelly, I don't think I've heard that one. Oh, Tracy loves the Black Stallion series. I've always wanted to read those, so that might be a good time to go back and look at those. My friend Flicka, Big Red, Island of Blue Dolphins. Sorry.
Rascal. It's about a raccoon.
Oh, nice. Kathy, I feel like Kathy Duncan, we would like to hear some Canadian titles, if you have any.
Put me on the spot, Irene. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, for those of you on the call who don't know, I'm probably one of the elder statesmen on this call. I'm not sure I can remember back to childhood books. But I have read and sort of share many of those that were posted in the chat, things like Big Red and Old Yeller and the Black Stallion series. I love Anne of Green Gables. Thank you. That's definitely Canadian. Just in case you don't know, she was from PEI, which is Prince Edward Island here in Canada. So hopefully that's helpful, Irene.
Oh, thank you. You're always helpful whenever you join our calls, so we appreciate you. I love hearing about these other books, Curious George and Wrinkle in Time. I'm a big fan of those as well. But I want to thank you all for being here and sharing some of your childhood memories with us. I wanted to open the floor up to national updates and begin with Dr. Dorothy Robertson.
Hey, Irene. Hi, I'm Jyoti. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a veterinarian. And I was recently invited to give a lecture on the relationship between veterinarians and leadership teams. So CEOs, executive directors, and so on. And so I created a short survey to take about 10 minutes that I'm really hoping that folks can share with their shelter teams, with veterinarians specifically, and with, again, anyone on the leadership team. I'm going to just put this into the chat. It's in Google's survey, and I'm told that it's anonymous as long as you don't log into your Google account. So just come at it like from some other account. And my plan is to share the results here on the call or just with others in some sort of a white paper or some, I haven't quite decided how I'm going to share it yet. But so far we have about 94 responses, and that's without sharing it on this call. I'm really hoping to get at least close to 150 responses. So I'm kind of excited for this. And then for anyone from California, there'll be a follow-up survey that a bunch of us are also going to be sending. So please have enough room and space to be able to do 2 surveys. Again, it's to better understand the relationship between vets and vet teams and CEOs and leadership. So thanks.
Thanks, Joyce. Anybody else wanted to unmute and share their national updates?
Hi, this is Jennifer Comas. I'm coming from the Humane Society of the United States. Just to remind everybody, if you would like to apply to speak at Animal Care Expo 2024 in San Antonio, we're just asking you to submit your application by July 31st, 11:59, and I will insert the link to apply to speak at Expo in our chat, and we really look forward to seeing those submissions come in.
Hey, everybody, it's Kathy from Canada, and Jennifer, the amazing Allison Gibson beat you to it. She's put the link in the chat already. So I haven't been on the call in a little bit, and I've been remiss. Humane Canada's Violence Link Conference and Prosecution Conference are virtual this year and will be coming up in November. Our call for speakers for those closes today, although it says on the website the 14th. We extended it and they haven't fixed that yet. So I'm going to put the link in the chat. You can also consider attending one of those if you're not interested in proposing to speak at one. So save the dates and the information will come through the chat so that you can do that. And you're all welcome because, of course, it's virtual.
All right, last call for national updates before I hand it over to Charlotte. All right, Charlotte.
Thank you, Irene. If you have any national updates, again, feel free to drop them in the chat as things pop up. But I would love to introduce you all today. We are joined by Cole Wakefield. He is the Executive Director at Good Shepherd Humane Society in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, where he oversees the organization's animal services, 2 retail thrift stores, and handles most administrative management and public relations. Cole's mission is to build model programs for rural implementation that improve the lives of animals and people in our community. Cole has been a huge voice for rural communities and animal well-being, and I previously saw him present on the topic at last year's Best Friends Conference. So I'm excited that Cole is here today as he explores the Rural Road, Lifesaving's longest mile, and highlights some of the major challenges facing rural communities and organizations. Cole, take it away.
Too many buttons to push. Okay. Is my screen share up? Wrong screen. Hold on. Sorry. We rehearsed this earlier. It worked great.
Almost there. You look good. Sound good.
There we go. Okay. So I'm Cole Wakefield. I am Executive Director of Good Shepherd Humane Society in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. We're in Northwest Arkansas. We serve Carroll County, which is a rural area of the Ozarks with about 28,000 people spread over 640 square miles. I've been with Good Shepherd for around 4 years, and prior to that, I was clinic manager for Hope Humane Society, a much larger humane society in my hometown of Fort Smith, Arkansas. I'm a graduate of the Best Friends Southern Utah University Executive Leadership Certificate Program, and I've earned my master's degree in management and leadership from Western Governors University, and I'm also a member of the AWA DEI Council. So I am a native Arkansan. I grew up just a couple of hours south of where I live today, and I've spent my time here at Good Shepherd transforming it into what I feel is a sort of best practices, forward-thinking organization. However, doing this wasn't without its challenges, like it is everywhere, but many of those challenges were enhanced by our rural location. And I think, though, even with the challenges in a rural area, I think that we have shown that this work is not only possible in rural areas with the right adjustments, but that it is vital that we do this type of work in rural areas and that we get doing it now. Last year at the Best Friends National Conference, I presented some truths about the challenges facing rural communities, and some of them were, I think, some hard truths, and about how these communities can often struggle to fit into our greater national conversation. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done on that front, but we have seen a significant increase in interest an investment towards finding rural solutions. And this call is evidence of that. And I'm really excited to be here. There are a few distinct parts to the presentation this morning. The first part will involve defining what rural actually is or isn't, and highlighting some of the particular challenges facing rural areas. Second, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing at Good Shepherd that is effective in our rural area. And finally, I want to wrap up with some of my perspectives on some specific and emerging issues. Again, I'm honored to have been invited to present here in front of all of y'all today, and I hope that I am able to do justice to the value of your time. Okay. There we go. Now, what is rural? I get asked that question a lot. And every agency, government agency, seems to have its own definition. And individually, we tend to define our idea of rural based upon personal experience. So someone who grows up in Los Angeles might consider my hometown of Fort Smith as rural, while if you lived around Fort Smith was very much the big city with 70,000 people. It was at that, when growing up, it was the second largest city in the state of Arkansas. So some people, that city is rural, other people, that is the big city. Now, most definitions consider population density, but may also include other factors such as proximity to large urban areas. And sometimes that doesn't really make sense depending on the definition. So the Census Bureau, for example, classifies Berryville, Arkansas, where I live now, as an urban center. But Berryville is a 5,500 person town. It's over 45 minutes away from any major metropolitan area, and it doesn't benefit from any services traditionally available to urban areas. Even DoorDash outside of regular hours can be hard to get because there are 2 DoorDashers. And when they're asleep, you don't get it. So even though some people would classify it as urban, in reality it is a very rural area. Now, many challenges facing rural areas are also felt in isolated, larger metro areas. And another example for that would be Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Pine Bluff, Arkansas, even though it's a city of 41,000 people, it is, and it's technically a part of the Little Rock Metropolitan Statistical Area, but it's really essentially separated from Little Rock. It's its own sort of island out there, facing a 30% poverty rate. And so it has a lot of rural challenges that are just essentially supersized because of the isolated urban aspect. And that's something that we need to continue to consider and look at. A nearly universal assumption about the rural United States is that it's all farms, much like the picture that you see there. And many assume that agriculture is our biggest rural industry. And in terms of land, it is, but in terms of employment, both the service and manufacturing segments are significantly larger than agricultural segments, 2 to 3 times larger. So rural areas are not just a bunch of farms, so that is a significant part of it. And while my experience and my data that I have for this presentation is very sort of US centric, many of these same issues apply to the vast rural areas in our neighboring countries. So I definitely want to make sure that we are involving voices from both south and north of the US border in this conversation, because both of these different countries present their own unique cultural and environmental challenges. I think there is a lot of similarity within the challenges, and we need to have those discussions too. So the most accurate but not perfect definition for me is the Department of Agriculture's non-metro or non-core counties. So that's what this map is showing. So all in the blue are counties that are considered to be non-core or rural areas. And this would include some sort of combination of like open countryside, with rural towns, which are less than 2,500 people, or certain urban centers from 2,500 to 50,000 that are not part of a larger metropolitan area. But this gives you a general idea as far as the land coverage of rural areas of what we're talking about. So that's a significant part of the country. Even though this map actually misses several large rural areas, because in the West, where we have significantly large counties, like Clark County in Nevada, where Las Vegas is a urban center, but there are parts of Clark County that are an hour away from Las Vegas and are just as rural as the rest of rural America, but you don't see that as a rural county. But that gives you kind of an idea of just the coverage that we're talking about. Now, the US Census Bureau does classify around 90% of the landmass of the US as rural. Rural America, it's largely white, but it is increasingly diverse. And seeing rural issues as sort of a monolithic issue or a white issue is something that's pretty common when we talk about it. But in reality, that discounts a growing segment of our rural population. In fact, some of the most underserved and neglected communities in the country are rural minority majority communities and indigenous populations, both on and off reservations. 24% of rural Americans are BIPOC, and the concentration is even higher in the South and in the West. Many rural counties in the South are, in fact, majority minority counties. So rural areas also house a significant portion of the indigenous population on this continent. And it is vital that we include those communities in all of our discussions. Indigenous voices especially are missing from many of the conversations in animal welfare. We cannot afford to leave them out of this one. So I think when talking about rural areas, we need to be very intentional in bringing indigenous communities into the conversation. Now, there are several factors that make our work challenging. Our challenging work even more challenging in rural areas. The largest being the expansive coverage area. Now, rural agencies are often responsible for hundreds and sometimes thousands of square miles. Driving across some Western counties in the United States is the equivalent to driving across some New England states. There's usually no public transportation options, and infrastructure can be lacking. And this can pose a significant challenge for many of the community outreach models that we've developed lately. And there's also a lack of service. Significant swaths of rural America provide zero animal services, no shelter, no animal control, nothing. And with that comes limited resources. Many rural agencies are completely volunteer ran, and those with staff are generally have very limited staff. Rural areas do not have usually wealthy corporate citizens or fancy zip codes that we can tap for reliable funding. And the areas that we serve tend to have significantly above average poverty rates. Rural agencies might not even have reliable broadband internet access, something that I've struggled with here. And that's why I'm presenting from our thrift store, because our shelter has struggled with internet access. In addition, there is usually a general lack of traditional social services that we would otherwise lean on or leverage for many of our programs. And it's important to remember that animal welfare is not the only social service that is underinvested in rural areas. Most social services suffer from a similar underinvestment, which makes the lifting that we need to do even harder. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into some of these challenges. One of the largest ones that we're facing is poverty. Rural Americans experience poverty at rates higher than those in urban areas. The poverty rate in urban areas is around 12%, whereas it's over 15% in rural areas in general. And for certain demographics, that poverty rate can be significantly higher. In the South, the poverty rate is approaching 20%. And for African Americans in rural areas, poverty rate is over 30%. And poverty affects every aspect of animal welfare, from what resources the individuals have in their struggles to how much funding is available through tax-funded government services. And there's also something we need to remember is that there is lots of data suggesting that people at a lower economic level tend to have more pets. And we do know pretty solidly that rural households also tend to have more pets than the average household. So the needs individually may even be greater. So one challenge that we deal with, no matter where you're at in animal welfare, in both urban and rural areas, are resource deserts. And these are large areas where basic animal welfare resources like vet offices or pet stores, or even social service resources in general, may not readily be accessible for much of the population. To help us explore the similarities and differences between urban and rural resource deserts, I want to use two actual deserts. So we're going to look at the Mojave Desert here in North America to represent urban areas, and the Sahara Desert in Northern Africa for rural areas. And what I'm about to go through is a very sort of simplified hypothetical, but I do want to note that both of these deserts have significant communities in them already that have their own struggles and real issues. I just want to acknowledge that as I kind of use this illustration, which will be very simplified to what's going on. Now, for our situation, we are going to assume that we've been given the task of delivering some much needed water and supplies to a stranded group of people in each desert, in the center of each desert. In the Mojave, we'll say there's 100 people that are in desperate need, while in the Sahara, there's a group of 10 to 20 people. We're not really sure because we don't have a lot of good data, but it's smaller, but they're also in need. Delivering these supplies to the desert will present a logistical challenge in both areas. And for the scenario, we're just going to assume there's no resources inside the desert. Everything must be brought in, and there's no easy roads or access like that. So also compounding our problem is that the people have been stranded for some time and they're already suffering from dehydration and exposure. So our task is urgent and also complicated. Now, for the people in need, the issue is the same. It doesn't matter whether you're in the Mojave Desert or the Sahara Desert. All that matters from the perspective of those people is that they are suffering and they are in need. The thirst in the Mojave is just as great as the thirst in the Sahara. The sun burns hot in both locations. Now, since there are more people trapped in the Mojave and it's closer to our home base, the decision that we make is to go ahead and address the closer desert first, the Mojave Desert. And delivering supplies to the middle of that desert is a challenge. But the biggest issue comes from the amount of supplies it takes to support the 100 people that are stranded there. However, we're determined lifesavers. We've had bigger challenges before, so we figure it out and we soon deliver that water and supplies to the middle of the Mojave Desert. And let's just say we've done that. We've made great progress on the Mojave relief effort. There's still a lot of work to be done. We still have people in need, but we've started figuring it out and we're making some great progress. The first deliveries have arrived and we're starting to stabilize the situation. So now we have to figure out what we're going to do about the 10 to 20 people stuck in the middle of the Sahara. At first, it seems like, well, that shouldn't be too difficult, right? You know, we've delivered the supplies to the Mojave. We kind of figured it out. We figured out what kind of trucks we need. We know how to get there. And so now really we're thinking all we need to do is kind of copy and paste the Mojave solution over to the Sahara group. And in reality, you know, logically, this should even be cheaper because we've saved 100 people in the Mojave Desert and there's only 10 to 20 in the Sahara. However, while that seems to make logical sense, there's one major problem that we haven't considered. The Sahara Desert is over 76 times the size of the Mojave. This dramatically changes the logistical challenge of delivering supplies, even if it is only for 10 to 20 people. So we'll quickly realize that even though the need in both deserts is the same, and the problem is the same in both places, we probably won't be able to use the Mojave plan to save the people in the Sahara. And saving the people in the Sahara will be impossible if we're expected to do that on the same cost basis as our work for the Mojave. In reality, it may cost us just as much to just get to the people in the Sahara as it does for the entire Mojave operation. But still, those lives in the middle of the Sahara Desert are just as valuable and need just as much assistance as those in the Mojave. The principles of equity demand that we do whatever it takes to save both groups, regardless of their total numbers or the complexity of their rescue. Both groups are worthy and in need. However, they each require different methods to achieve the same solution. And it's with that in mind that we must always concurrently develop models for both rural and urban communities, with the realization that even though the needs of the community is the same, the methods to get there will be different. And that example was a little hyperbolic, but it really isn't that far from the reality. The areas that rural agencies are expected to cover are expansive, with many counties being larger than some states. You can look at this graphic here where, Wyoming is 4,200 square miles for the average county size. Montana is 2,600 square miles. Texas is 1,000 square miles. Arkansas over 700, and in Louisiana over 800. And these are average. So we know that there are counties that are even larger than this. And when you consider that the state of Delaware is 1,900 square miles, you can imagine the challenge of covering and providing services for these large jurisdictional areas. And we're going to look here at maps of Arkansas, Texas, and Montana. And this is to show us that rural areas are not only resource deserts, but they are service deserts. One of the biggest challenges we have with delivering assistance to rural communities is the lack of existing organizations that many core or metro areas take for granted. These maps here, they show counties, and remember how big the counties in some of these states are, that have zero animal services. So where you see red, there are places where the government provides no animal services. There is no animal control. There is not a shelter. There is nothing. And while these maps are already pretty red, they actually significantly underrepresent the lack of service in rural areas. Best Friends puts the number of unsheltered counties at around over 800 nationwide. And again, the counties without a shelter, that's mind-blowing in itself, but that's only part of the lack of service picture. Take a look at Madison County, Arkansas. This is a county just south of me. Madison County covers 837 square miles with a population of 16,000 people. Now, Madison County on the maps you just saw, it was shown as a service county because there is a small private nonprofit animal shelter there and one animal control agency in the county. Now, as far as those field services with the animal control agency, they only cover the city of Huntsville, which is that little yellow spot in the center. They have one part-time officer that covers the city's 5.4 square miles and 2,500 people. The private shelter has a contract with the city and is pretty much full up just taking care of that. So they're not able to provide any staff or resources for field services to the wider county. So what that means, even though this is technically a service county, 830 square miles and 14,000 people in that county have zero animal services coverage. And this is a very common scenario for rural counties. So you can see how even more dramatic that no coverage map would be if I had time, talent, and data to be able to actually make a better map, but I have to pull other people's maps. The lack of service can severely hamper attempts to adopt models that include public-private partnership or engaging with animal control and field services. For much of the country, there is simply no one to partner with. So now that we've identified this problem and we've identified some key pain points, the question is now, what do we do about it? At Good Shepherd, we've had some success in translating larger scale programs into a rural setting. And I'll get more into that. We'll get more into that as I'm presenting with Lee Allen, the fabulous Lee Allen, at Best Friends Conference in Houston, where we're going to dive deep into some of Good Shepherd's programs. So if you're going to be in Houston, come out and see that program. But there is one important thing, and I think it's very important, that I try to mention every time that I present about rural areas. And I think it's one of the most important things that any rural organization can do. And that is engage your community by adopting to them. One program that can be implemented at most agencies without additional cost or resources is open adoptions. Adoptions are generally the most efficient, most cost-effective, and least resource-intensive live outcome that we can have outside of return to owner, which should be number one. We sometimes see the worst, right? We see the worst that comes into, and we see all sorts of things that come into our agencies and facilities, and that can sometimes color our perceptions of our communities and can create a hesitation to adopt. But the reality is that the vast majority of people in every community, even your community, are caring, compassionate human beings who would provide a loving home for an animal in your shelter. There are no perfect homes, but most homes are better than a kennel, and certainly better than euthanasia. Adoptions also create vital links to your community. Good Shepherd's greatest supporters and our most active volunteers have been adopters. Now, not every community can rely on adoptions 100%, but if you eliminate the ineffective barriers, ones that kind of make you feel better but don't actually result in the better outcomes, and you directly and actively engage your community, you may be surprised at the result. Good Shepherd, we're a rural shelter. We increased the raw number of our live outcomes by over 300% by opening up adoptions. We've done this for over 3 years. We have seen no increase in returns. We have not seen an issue with bad adoptions or any issues like that. And we've been able to cut our reliance on transport by 95%, and we have greatly improved our connections to the community. Performing adoptions in rural communities is important for another reason. The people in your area, they're going to adopt pets, and they're going to either get them from a breeder, from the Walmart parking lot, or they can get them from you. And when they adopt from you, they get an animal that is spayed, that can be microchipped, that is vaccinated. And this will help you build a community of altered, vaccinated animals, and it will have all the benefits that come from that, and it will help you establish those relationships with your community. So please try it, open up your adoptions, take that risk, it is worth it. So in a broader sense, what can we as animal welfare leaders and leaders in animal welfare and animal well-being do to address the rural issue? I have a couple of challenges. My challenge to national organizations and grant makers is to build rural into program development and pilot programs from the start. We do a lot of development inside metro agencies, and it makes a lot of sense as to why we do that. They have the extra staff, they have programs staff, but from the beginning, when we're looking at developing pilot programs that we want to deploy nationally, we need to bake rural into it from the start. I also challenge nationals to reevaluate metrics that are based on cost effectiveness or efficiency. Rural areas will never be able to compete on dollars per life saved or operate on the same efficiency levels of city counterparts. The distances and the lack of concentration just make that impossible. So if you are evaluating and you're measuring funding options with those metrics only, then you are severely hampering rural areas' ability to acquire funding. We need to recruit rural experience onto programs development and grant-making teams. Getting the rural voice in the room is critical to developing effective solutions that will work for everyone. Make sure you have rural experience on your working groups. We also need to implement rural leadership development programs. One reason we don't have a lot of representation of rural voices on the national level is that there is a severe lack of leadership development in rural and small agencies. Rural orgs can barely afford their basic operations, and their time is generally held up with just cleaning the kennels. So we truly need national resources and national outreach to help with rural leadership development so that we can get rural leaders onto committees and into important parts of program development. And please, we need to work on developing and delivering more equitable funding to rural areas. Right now, rural communities only receive a fraction of the grant money they should based upon their population. And this is often because many rural organizations may not know how to apply for funding or that there's even funding available out there. So in some areas, there may not even be a traditional rural organization to apply for the funding at all. So we need to work with nationals to help figure out how we can close the rural funding gap. And we need to continue to make room for the rural conversation. We're doing that today thanks to Maddie, and I'm so excited about it. Conversations like this are key to keeping the ball moving forward. Now, everyone else, what can we do? If you live in a rural community or you work for a rural organization, thank you so much for taking the time for being on this call, because I know how overwhelmed you are. You're already doing something very important by reaching out and engaging and connecting and learning and sharing. Do your best to connect to other rural leaders in your area and share with them these calls and resources. If you have cracked the rural code on a program and you have something that is just doing amazing, or you've developed ways to overcome some of these challenges that we're discussing, share it. I would love to hear about it. Email me, get on Maddie's pet forum, talk about it. We want to know how you're figuring this out so that we can spread the word and get these programs running in rural areas. If you work in a metropolitan area or a large humane society with rural neighbors that you're trying to reach out to them and see if there are ways you can help. Build partnerships, meet them where they're at. Sponsor rural leaders to conferences and educational opportunities. Help form regional coalitions that allow for organizations to support each other. And really, if you have some rural things, I know that some of those rural neighbors of yours would love some help on where to connect to for grants and how to write grants and how to get funding. So if you have a development team, help train your rural neighbors. If you're in rural areas, I understand that grant the process and grant finding can be intimidating and it can be confusing. But there are lots of grant opportunities out there, and there are not nearly enough rural agencies that are applying for them. Do not be intimidated by the process. You can go on Maddie's Pet Forum, ASPCA Pro, Humane Pro. They all have grant resources. So look for them and find them. Right now, Petco Love's animal welfare organization grants are open, and they're open until the 31st. These grants are unrestricted, and you apply for them just by filling out your information, submitting your annual data. They're a great way to get a grant from somebody. Log on to Petco Love. You still have time to do that. You have to get it in by the 31st. Also, a great sort of easy way to get into applying for grants. Petfinder.org has several small grants that you can apply for year round. A pretty simple application process. Get on there and apply for anything that you can use. A Pet Finder grant got Good Shepherd doing play groups, and that has been had an amazing impact. And I could do a whole nother session on how amazing that has been for us. And most importantly, reach out. You see this picture here. That is one of my workers with the Green Forest Animal Control Team. Thanks to a partnership that they've reached out to us, we were able to get a partnership with Humane Society of the US, where we have a mentorship grant, and we are working with another rural agency to transform them into doing something great. And they have an amazing officer. But reach out, make those connections. More and more work is being done to support rural areas, but if no one knows that you're out there, they can't help you. Last week, I got a phone call from Humane Society just a couple of hours east of me here in Arkansas. Their entire program is volunteer ran, and they've struggled in finding connections. But now that they've reached out to me, we're going to be working together to get them connected and identify resources and get them plugged in. So you never know who's around you and what they can do for you. So again, reach out, listen to these calls, join Pet Forum, and sign on to the various national networks and partnerships. Most nationals have regional leadership. Look them up, touch base with them. Your responses may vary. They're busy too, but start squeaking, start being the squeaky wheel, and don't stop squeaking. You have to speak up for yourself and your rural community. And before I wrap up, there's a couple more things I want to say. The rural challenge, like most we face, is epic and daunting, but it is not hopeless. The conversation is ongoing and awareness is growing. I'm working with some partners right now on gathering rural leaders and national policymakers together for the first time. And if you're interested in being a part of that conversation, please email me. We need diverse and experienced rural voices. And I'm truly excited about where the conversation is going, but it's got to be, I need everybody, because the challenges even within rural areas can be very different. I do want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen this morning. I hope that what I've presented has been interesting and maybe helpful. And I thank you again to all my rural and isolated colleagues for doing what you do and sticking through this tough battle, especially with the challenges that we're facing recently. And thank you to everyone on the call for your work, whether it's paid or volunteer, that you do to make the lives of the people and the pets in your community better. Another big thank you to Maddie's Fund for reaching out and hosting this call and the ongoing conversation on Pet Forum. And I look forward to engaging with you guys on the Pet Forum, and please reach out to me there. I want to get that conversation going. And again, if you're going to Best Friends National Conference in Houston next month, Lee Allen and I will be presenting with some more detail on what we're doing specifically at Good Shepherd to make a rural impact and change some of these programs rurally. There's a little overlap in the presentation, but that's essentially a completely different presentation. And if you can't make it to the Best Friends Conference, we'll also be presenting at Midwest Animal Sheltering Conference in Springfield, Missouri, which is a great regional conference for the Midwest. That's happening in October. So please try to register for that. You can come out and see us there. I'm always open with any questions, comments, concerns, or even if you have some criticisms, I'm okay with those too. You can email me at colew@goodshepherd-hs.org. If you email me with some sort of request or a question or something and I don't get back to you email me again. I'm sorry, I do have that ADD email inbox problem where sometimes I even respond in my head and don't realize I never got it onto the email. So if you were expecting something from me and you don't hear, please poke me again. I'm so sorry about that. But I guess we have time left. If we do, I'm happy to take some questions now or continue with the discussion. And I don't know. I wasn't able to watch the chat, so I don't know if anything popped up in there either.
Yes, thanks so much, Cole. So there will be some time for Q&A if anybody wants to think of some questions. Before we get to one of the questions in the chat, I did want to remind folks, since you brought up grants, for folks who are new to the call, Maddie's Fund is giving away up to $5,000 per month for joining the community conversations here live or on demand, and each person from your organization can enter to win for each and every call for that month. Thanks to Amber for providing the entry links throughout this call. And of course, thank you, Cole, for teeing us up so well to talk about that grant opportunity. We do have a question from Penny who asks, I noticed a lot of area not classified in Arizona. Does the map not classify the reservation area, which is a very large part of Arizona?
Yeah, I would have to go and look at the core data. I mean, sometimes with what happens with large counties is sort of that Clark County effect, where there may be a large city in the corner of the county, and so the whole county is classified as serviced or unserviced based upon that one thing. And then honestly, I don't know how the reservations were handled, because that was pulled directly from somewhere else, but that's something I can look into.
Okay, great. Thank you. And from what I've read, and others on the call or maybe who joined Maddie's platform might be able to speak to this better, but for various reasons, some reservations might have street addresses, which of course can impact mail, voting right opportunities. And so I can just imagine that it might impact access to other resources as well. Did anybody have any questions that they wanted to unmute and ask?
Nadia had a great question. If you'd like to unmute Nadia and ask Cole.
Sure. Thank you, Cole. That was such a great presentation and very timely, because we're launching a grant cycle here at the California for All Animals program. So I've been working on the application. I'm trying to make it as easy and barrier-free as possible. So I wanted to hear from you, if you can tell me and other funders, what are some of the main barriers that folks in rural communities face when applying for grants?
Really, some of it is just the most basic stuff. So a lot of grant applications will ask for statistics, intake levels and all that, and which, I mean, makes sense as to why. But that information is not always readily available for rural groups and small groups who may not have shelter management software. Like I said, Green Forest that we started working with now just a few months ago when we got them onto Shelter Love. Until then, everything, 100 dogs a year or whatever was on paper, paper and binders. So if you're heavy on data requests, especially for small orgs, that can be a challenge for them to pull historical data, because it may involve hand counting who knows how many papers. So sometimes it really is the most basic stuff that can be a barrier. Yeah, I guess that's one of the key ones. It's just assuming that they have data, or assuming that if they don't have data, it is somehow reflective of the organization's ability, is not necessarily fair. And I don't know what the answer is to overcome that, because the data is very important in the process, but it's something that we need to consider.
Thank you, Cole. And would you mind unsharing your screen? And then I have another question from the chat for you. Does your county have a separate county facility, and how do you work with them?
So in my county, there's no county facility and no county animal control officers. We have 3 small cities that each have part-time animal control. Our Green Forest now has full-time. We don't have a contract because none of the cities are able to offer us a contract that would not be financially devastating for our organization. So we work with them closely, but without a contract. But we're the only shelter. The town that we're closest to, Eureka Springs, a town of 2,000 people, their entire shelter are 2 yard pens outside of the police department. And they have a great animal control officer who works really hard on return to home, but there are no government true facilities here. It's all privately operated by us.
Got it. And Amy asks that she'd like to initiate a conference in her rural area covering many of the topics you discussed. Do you have any ideas? Would you start small or invite the large metro nearby?
I mean, do it for sure. I would also, and you may be able to find some funding or and reach out to whatever, if whatever your region, I'd reach out to your regional best friends team and or some of your other nationals who sometimes kind of help put on these little mini conferences. But you can start as small as a conversation around a table as far as figuring out what else everybody needs. And, if you come up with a list of, hey, I've talked to some people, we really need to know about behavior or about return to home or whatever it is. And, reach out to me or reach out to some of these other national partners, and we can try to see if we can get something focused there. But there is right now some momentum in doing more of those types of focused small conferences. So get the conversation started, reach out, and hopefully we can, or you can get something going, and loop me in and I'll see what I can do to help.
Thank you. I think that was all of the questions related to your presentation. And if there are any more, of course, we open up that conversation on the Maddie's Pet Forum. Charlotte, over to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Cole. That was just an incredible presentation. Every time I watch you speak, I learn something new, and I really love the way you kind of break it down for us to really get small chunks and see the bigger picture. So we appreciate your time. I'll drop some more links in the chat. Cole has written some great blog posts on LinkedIn. He's written some incredible things on Maddie's Pet Forum as well. So we'd love to have you continue the discussion there. As a reminder, the recording of today's call will be available on the forum, and we hope to see you back here next week. We will have a panel discussion on CARE's Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion course. It'll feature a lot of the organizations who have completed it. So thank you all again, and I hope you all have a great week. Thank you.